So, ahead of the release of the Green Lantern live action TV show, I wanted to take a look back and talk about the Green Lantern Ryan Reynolds movie. Now, you know I'm just playing. Now, I actually wanted to talk about a good Green Lantern project called Green Lantern the Animated Series. A show that most people, even DC fans, have probably not heard of and they definitely haven't seen. Originally premiering in November of 2011 with a two-part opener, about 6 months after the Green Lantern movie. Green Lantern, the animated series, was based around Hal Jordan traveling into deep space with a small team of companions in an effort to combat an enemy that is hell bent on destroying the Green Lantern Corps and the Guardians, who are an immortal race of beings who are in charge of the created the Green Lantern Corps, and they preside over the universe, as its protectors. So right off the bat, I wanted to talk about the first great decision that the creators made, and that's by taking Hal Jordan far away from Earth and keeping him removed from the Justice League and just the greater DC universe. Most people's knowledge of Green Lantern, whether it's Hal or John, or Guy, it's them acting as more of an ensemble character. Usually, either getting packed up by Batman or folded by Superman or Darkseid or whatever, and either just being annoying or extremely boring. But here we get to learn a lot about Hal, and we're subsequently introduced to numerous different alien, lanterns throughout the course of the show. All of them coming from different worlds and cultures, but are ultimately united under a single banner and purpose. It's to protect and serve their sectors of space from intergalactic threats. Really, it's the sheer scale of really helps add a level of stakes that just isn't captured in many other DC projects, animated projects, and it broadened my horizon on just the magnitude of the DC universe. The show is broken up into two individual arcs that both culminate in these like full galactic wide events, where the fate of the universe is just on the line. The setting of the show, and it also segues into like kind of another a really great choice that the show made, and it's the fact that it's not an origin story. It's very clear when we're introduced to Hal Jordan that he already is an experienced Green Lantern, just based on the way that you get to see him handle a mini crisis in his introduction scene, and you also get a little sprinkle of exposition, quickly after, but even that serves a dual purpose in showing the audience his personality. They do a really good job of introducing everything in a way that doesn't feel super on the nose. Pretty much all the mechanics of the Green Lantern ring are, they're shown to us within the premiere episodes. The first scene in the entire show is a scene where you get to see a Green Lantern, get killed, and then you learn, what happens to the ring after a lantern is killed, how it works. And then it also is, simultaneously, it's the event that kickstarts the conflict, with the Red Lanterns. There are many scenes like this, throughout the show where whenever a new character or ability or piece of lore is introduced, it's later paid off in a satisfying way that doesn't leave the audience, wondering what the point of that was. I would also argue, that while Hal Jordan's characterization is done very well in the show, but he isn't really the focus for very long. Early on, they lean heavily into his character, but as the show progresses, it begins to focus more on some of its original characters. Yeah, and once again, right, it's another stroke of genius in utilizing characters that people are already familiar with, right? to just to sink that hook of interest, but then slowly building their original characters where by the end they become the most interesting characters, largely because they're not held down by these audience expectations. That's a problem that many of the recent Star Wars projects suffer from, and it's that they constantly keep having to reuse characters or factions, whose arcs are already complete, and then they try to shoehorn in more. But the intrigue and the tension in the story, it's always lacking because of what the audience already knows and expects. Like Maul's Shadow Lord is, it's cool and all, and I love Darth Maul as much as the next guy, but what else can you really do with the character other than continuously retcon previous events in an endless loop? Yeah, but okay, that's a discussion for another video. But yeah, the original characters they're very well done in the animated series, and yeah, by the end they are the focus, and they're the characters that that we are the most invested in. I think though my overall favorite aspect of the show is definitely the lore and the world building. For those unfamiliar, right? The show it's heavily influenced by the Jeff Johns run of the Green Lantern comics, spanning from Rebirth in what 2004, it goes on to through what was it, Brightest Day comic line. And these are the comics that introduced the other colors of the Lantern Corps, and they really do add a lot of flavor to the mythos with the emotional spectrum, and eventually they build into this massive events with the Blackest Night where you have a bunch of dead characters who are revived as zombies, and it was very popular at the time when it came out. But yeah, the different Lantern Corps, they're all powered by different emotional light energies that have been they're harnessed into these lanterns, and then they get to they use the power rings to fuel their like the user's abilities. So yeah, in the animated series, we're introduced to the Red Lanterns as the main antagonists for the first half of the show, and they're completely fueled and driven by rage, as opposed to our heroes, the Green Lanterns, who operate off of willpower. The angrier the Red Lanterns get, the more powerful one becomes. And between all the different lantern colors, you get all sorts of fun dynamics, and the show, it really leans into it. We're only introduced to about half of the emotional spectrum due to the show being canceled after only one season. But it's very clear that they were building up to their own version of the Sinestro Corps War with like the Yellow Lanterns, and then eventually the Blackest Night event. And it's a real shame, we never got to see that. And I think it's very unlikely that the show's ever going to get rebooted for a second season. The big reason that is often cited as the reason the show was canceled was due to the poor performance of the Ryan Reynolds film and a lack of toy sales, of course. The show was also airing at the same time as Young Justice, and which was definitely the more popular of the two DC shows. Though, even though that one was canceled too, thankfully, Young Justice ended up getting an additional couple seasons later, even if they weren't really as good, in my opinion. There actually was an episode, and was it season four, I think, where they actually followed up after the end of Green Lantern the animated series with one of its like main characters, which was a nice treat. I'm sure it was super confusing though for people who never watched Green Lantern, and I kind of have mixed thoughts on some of like how they did some like lore breaking stuff with like the red and blue rings, but whatever. I would highly recommend, though, any DC fan to give the Green Lantern animated series a watch. I've never, I've gone onto like YouTube and like try to like look for some reaction videos, and I've never seen any reactor who was, who didn't give it a shot and didn't like it, right? Like I think most people would like the story and how the characters are handled. But I'm hoping that this upcoming Lantern show, right, it pays good respect to the universe and the world, and it pops off. But hey, if it doesn't turn out well, I would encourage people to either come back or to come and give this show a chance, see how it's done right. Anyway, that's all I got, and I would love to hear if any of you have any thoughts and would like to share them down in the comments below. But anyway, yeah, see y'all in the next video.